Hello and welcome to episode 56 of Grouchy Old Geeks. My name's Steve, my co-host is Scott.
Hello. Okay, so welcome back. For our main feature, we're going to talk about potential cinematic universes. So we obviously know there's the MCU, there's the Star Wars, which can kind of be considered the cinematic universe, and a few others out there. But we're trying to find out potentially what things are missing that could have their own cinematic universes. But before we get started, Steve, just a quick question: Did you sort of set yourself any guidelines or rules on picking your picks?
No, the only thing I was thinking about was that my ideas were, potentially it would start with a film or series of films, but it could also start with multiple TV series and spin off. So my idea was, rather than limit to just one film, it could start there and then fan out, much like Star Wars and the MCU and DC and all this sort of stuff. What about you? Did you set any kind of limits?
So I didn't want to mention anything that had already had a movie or a TV show made out of it, which precluded quite a lot of stuff actually.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to kind of think about things that hadn't been brought to the screen at all before, as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
And actually, my whole list is from novels rather than from comics.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Not that there aren't many brilliant comics out there.
Yeah.
But it was much easier to think of good book series than it was for me to think of good comic series.
That's fair enough. Yeah. I've got a few. Okay, do you want to go first? Then we'll see how we get on.
Lots of these things I'm going to mention, as far as I can remember, we've never talked about. So I'm actually going to be interested in whether you've read them or even heard of some of them. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to find out what you think. So the first one I was going to mention is the War Against the Couture series. Have you heard about this?
No, the name's vaguely familiar, but I've not read it. Tell me.
So it's a series of books by David Gerrold, and people will know David Gerrold from actually being a TV script writer. So in the original Star Trek, he wrote The Trouble with Tribbles, amongst other Star Trek episodes. But he wrote The War Against the Couture. It's planned to be a 6-book series. I started reading it when there was 3 books out, and then shortly after I started reading it, the 4th book came out in the series.
Yeah.
And he's currently working on the 5th book. But his time between the 4th book and the 5th book coming out it would make fans of George R.R. Martin weep.
I remember you telling me about this. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So current as it stands. So there isn't any plans to bring out the fifth book. But as of today, there's a 24-year gap between the 4th book and the 5th book. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's an absolutely brilliant series. So it's about it's set sort of relatively early in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And it's during a period of really severe political upheaval. So lots of countries are falling out with each other. And then there's this big plague that wipes out quite a large chunk of humanity. So that's sort of like the backstory. And then what happens is it's basically a story of an alien invasion, but the aliens don't arrive in spaceships and with laser guns and basically saying, we're taking over, the Earth is ours now. There are no sentient alien species in the whole of the series so far.
Right.
Basically, what happens is the alien invasion is being done by the aliens essentially terraforming the Earth to look like their planet. So all of a sudden, you start having these new plant, hundreds of new plant species start growing all around the planet.
Yeah.
And, hundreds of new animal species, some of which are extremely deadly, start growing around the planet. And the Earth's, because of the new plant life, the Earth's atmosphere starts to change. So that the planet Earth is basically slowly turning into something that looks like the aliens' planet.
Wow.
So the idea is that they're kind of turning into something that's hospitable for them, so that they can just sort of come and live here in comfort. Is kind of the assumption. So it's about the last remains of humanity trying to survive on a planet Earth that's slowly becoming not the planet Earth anymore. And it's, like I was saying, it's full of political intrigue, full of different factions arguing with each other. And, it's set, its setting is the whole of the planet Earth and about how people are surviving. And it's this, and that's why I'm kind of thinking of it as a good cinematic universe, because there are so many different viewpoints and so many different stories that you can tell. You're not just limited to the main stars of the book.
Yeah,
you could actually tell lots and lots of different stories and tell what's happening from lots and lots of different points of view.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's so much potential there,
and
so much space.
Yeah, and if they turn it into a cinematic universe, they could continue the story with less than 24-year gaps between them.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully.
Because David Gerrold must be in his 90s now, I'm guessing.
Oh, no. Well, you're not going to get the last book, are you?
That's the worry. Let me see if I can find out how old he is.
Okay.
He's he's younger than I thought. He's a mere 77.
Wow.
So he must have been super young when he was writing for Star Trek.
Yeah, must have been. Wow. Okay.
Anyway, that was my first suggestion. What about yours?
Right. So my first one is actually a comic.
Oh, brilliant.
I think it's one that we've discussed in the past. I'm sure I will have raised it several times, but for those who haven't read it and have heard nothing about it, I can tell you a little bit about it. And this is Lazarus, written by Greg Rucka and art by Michael Lark. So in the series, the world has been divided up into, it's a slightly dystopian science fiction series, I should say. And the world has kind of not gone through a crisis or any kind of apocalypse, but society has evolved where the world is ruled by 16 families, and each of them has their own territory, and they rule it like it's their own country, essentially. And the rules within there are completely their own. They control the military, they control the hospital, the medical, the food production. And each of the families has a particular strength in one area. It could be in technology, it could be in genetics, it could be in growing crops and agriculture, and all of this kind of overlaps. And then society's devolved into these 3 tiered systems. So the highest members of each area are obviously the people who are direct members of the family. And then there are other like tiers and tiers of people, and that you attempt to try and climb the ranks, as it were. And as you improve, your life improves and your lot improves, and then your family will improve with you. So you've got this kind of very structural system where people want to work hard to improve their lot in life. And it's very, very a feudal system with the families fighting against each other. And each family has a Lazarus. This is essentially their ultimate warrior, a kind person who's got different abilities as well. And they're the sort of the commander of the armies, or at least they're sort of special forces person that's sent in to do missions. And it's really, really complicated. There's lots of stuff going on. Like each Lazarus is slightly different, and depending upon their family's background, they have different abilities. So the main focus of the story is around one Lazarus called Eva, and her family, I don't want to spoil it too much, but they have great regenerative technology, So if she's injured, she can heal very, very quickly. She can be shot, and she's not like Wolverine where she can just shrug off the bullets and spit them out and she'll be fine. But it's leaning in that direction. And there's so much scope for this because it has been optioned for TV, and apparently Amazon won the bid, and there was a war for it. But this was in 2015. And it's been in development like many things for a number of years. And whether it actually happens, I don't know. But I think you could kick it off with one film and then just spin it off into an ongoing film series plus a TV series, because there's so much stuff. You can't just do it in one film.
It sounds really interesting. So I've heard you mention it before, but I'm pretty sure it's not something that I've read. But I'll tell you what your description of it reminded me of.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't want to insult either thing by making this comparison. But the way that you were describing it made me think a little bit of Into the Badlands.
A little bit, but it's less stylized, more realistic. Society is still a lot more familiar than compared to Into the Badlands, which has devolved into a medieval system, as it were, whereas Lazarus technology is absolutely front and center.
Right.
It's very much important, and medicine is still, disease and all the rest of it. It's common, and technology's moved on a step from where we are in the present. So I think it's set slightly in the future, but not by much.
Right.
So people still wear the same sort of clothes and guns and weapons and things that you have, but it's all a little bit heightened, like you'd see in some science fiction films. But they don't have laser beams or spaceships or anything like that. But it's still that idea of nature versus nurture. Rucker's talked about William Gibson and Neuromancer. Helping him kind of influence the world building. There's a lot of character stuff there. There's really interesting characters to develop and delve into. And each of the Lazarus is kind of like an Avenger in their own way, because they're all a little bit different and they're all kind of really, really special. It's really, really clever. And I think it would actually work as a TV series better than a film. Because there's so many layers to peel. So it was originally pitched as The Godfather meets Children of Men.
Wow, interesting.
That's how it was pitched to the Image Comics kind of chief guy. That's probably a good touchstone, really.
And has it been finished, or is it ongoing?
It's ongoing, but it's slowed down because of lots of different things. But it started in 2013. And I think when interest came in for this, it perhaps moved things back a bit. And obviously Greg Rucka created Stumptown, which is a TV series with Kobe Smulders, and he did The Old Guard. That's another comic book series of his, which was made into a film with Netflix. So his ideas are very, at the moment, in the zeitgeist. So I'm hoping those two carry this forward and make it a reality sooner rather than later.
Yeah, cool. It sounds really good, and it sounds like exactly my sort of thing as well. I'm 99% sure that I've never read it, but it's definitely something, even if it never becomes a cinematic universe or a TV universe, it's definitely something that
worth reading.
I'd be interested in checking out.
Yeah, you could pick up the first couple of trades, and I think you'd really enjoy it because there's a lot to kind of chew on. It's not just people fighting each other with swords. There's lots of layers to it, and it's quite thoughtful. So yeah. Okay, what's your next one?
Cool. So this is another book series.
Yep.
That I don't think we've ever spoken about before. So I don't know whether you've ever read it or not.
Okay.
But it's a book series by let me just make sure that I've got getting his name, but I'm pretty sure I know his name, by David Brin, called The Uplift Saga. Have you heard
of David Brin, but I've not heard of this series. Go ahead.
So the Uplift Saga is very, very interesting. So it's really sort of hard science fiction in the sense that There's spaceships and people are set in space, and people go to other planets and things like that. So it's not just near future; it's sort of far future science fiction. And the way that this future society works is that every known race out there has been what they call uplifted by an older race. Right. So for example, what these races will tend to do is they will find a species on a planet that are sort of pre-sentient. So they're not like, not human beings or anything like that, they're it's before they're sentient, but they have the potential to be. And then they will do what they call uplift them. So they will give them more intelligence and make them into a much brainier species. But the cost of that uplift is that this species will then essentially become indentured servants to the uplifting species for hundreds of thousands of years before that debt becomes paid off. And it's a very, very hierarchical society. So all of when a creature introduces themselves, they'll say their name and their species, and then they'll list out the history of their species. So all of the uplifting species before they got to them, and they'll also list out all the species that they've uplifted. So the whole universe is sort of like in this cycle of uplifting.
A pyramid scheme.
A pyramid scheme. And it's very, in lots of ways, it's sort of very Victorian. I mean, it's a very rigid society that's sort of founded on tradition and ceremony and things like that. The interesting exception to that is human beings. And nobody can quite work out how, but human beings attain sentience without being uplifted. So they were just discovered as a sentient species, and the initial sentient species died out like 1 billion years ago. So nobody knows who the original uplifters were, but they just know that society is like governed this way now. But humanity, all of a sudden, even though it's like a very young species, all of a sudden has a very senior role in this universe because nobody uplifted them. And so they're not beholden to any other species.
Right, yeah.
And at the same time, humanity has also began to uplift species from its own planet. So there are sentient chimpanzees and sentient dolphins.
Oh, wow.
That human beings have uplifted.
Wow.
And it's all about how humanity finds its role within this universe. And the first book is absolutely brilliant in introducing this. The first book is called Sundiver. And it reminds me a little bit of the beginning of Isaac Asimov's robot series, because the beginning of Isaac Asimov's robot series, it's a straight murder mystery story that's just set in this sci-fi universe.
Yeah.
And Sundiver is exactly the same. It's in essence, it's a murder mystery story, but in the telling of this murder mystery, it introduces you to this whole universe. And it's absolutely amazing. And, it's full of alien creatures that are truly alien. They're not just like, they're not like next generation aliens where they just look human,
stuck to the forehead.
They've got a few ridges on them. Yeah. These are actually, very alien aliens. And it's just such a fascinating universe that I think it would lend itself absolutely brilliantly to telling this sort of really wide open story.
Okay, interesting.
And they're absolutely brilliant books. They're really brilliant books.
Has he done quite a few within that universe?
Yeah, so he's done 6.
Okay.
And I've not read all of them. I've read at least 4. I think I've read 5 of them.
Right. Okay.
But they're absolutely brilliant series.
Right. All right. Interesting. It's interesting that so far we've both sort of done sci-fi-ish ones.
Mhm.
And my next one is actually a sci-fi book series as well.
Brilliant.
I think I'm sure we've spoken about this in the past because I mentioned it to you at one point. Have you read or have I told you about Old Man's War by John Scalzi?
Yes, so I haven't read the whole series,
Okay.
but I've at least read the first one, possibly the first two.
Right. So for those who haven't heard about it, it's not hard sci-fi. It's character-based sci-fi, I'd say, that begins with Old Man's War, and there are 6 books. The last one or two is like a collection of short stories and 2 novellas, I think, and it's okay, but it's nowhere near as good as the first 3, which are brilliant. Old Man's War tells the story of Earth slightly in the future. But what happens is if you want to go off planet and live somewhere else, then you can't just apply and go and do it. You have to kind of earn your way there. And one of the things they've asked people to do is when they get to retirement age, to go up it's not exactly a lift, but sort of go into space, and you're given a second opportunity to have another life, essentially. No one quite knows why. All they know is instead of getting old and dying on Earth, you can go into space and have some kind of an adventure, and you get to live out your life up there. But the requirement is you have to serve within the army, so they only recruit older people. And no one really knows why, because everybody that goes, they never come back. And so they can't really explain it. All they know, these people are going off and joining the army. Now, the reason they say is that these people have lived a life, they've got experience, therefore they're not going to be driven by the same passions as younger people. I can't tell you what the twist is without spoiling it for those who haven't read the book, but there's an interesting, it's funny as well. It's quite a funny, interesting twist that sets up the series, but thereafter it becomes focused on these soldiers who are all retired people fighting in this intergalactic war. And if you fight for, I think it's like 5 years, then you can retire and live on a colony planet that you've and other people have fought to protect and clear of these aliens. And then you get introduced to a larger intergalactic universe, that there are other aliens out there. Some are involved in this war, some are not. And it starts to kind of open the doors. But to begin with, there's just this very kind of action-focused mystery of this guy retires, he decides to take the risk. He doesn't, his kids are fine, his grandkids are fine. He hasn't got anything to do other than kind of wait to die. And he's like, well, no, I'll go and have a last adventure. Goes off up into space, finds out what the secret is, and he can never go back to Earth, but he gets to have a whole other kind of life as a soldier and do other things. And it's funny as well. It's interesting. It's serious. I don't want to say it's like Buffy, because that's kind of putting it too light a tone, but there is humor in it, and some serious moments that it can kind of flip, very quickly.
Yeah, it's an absolutely brilliant series, and John Scalzi this is going to sound like I'm saying it as an insult. I really don't mean it like this, but he's one of his books are like one of the easiest things I've ever read.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, they're very easy to read.
Yeah, they're very, very accessible, but absolutely brilliant ideas in them. Like I loved Old Man's War, and he also did a book called Red Shirts, which I thought was absolutely brilliant as well. But yeah, very, very, very huge. Like Red Shirts is an out and out comedy, pretty much. But Old Man's War, there's definitely. It's a serious story, but there's plenty of comedy and humor in there as well.
Yeah. And it's I think it's 6 books. I think, but it'd make a great film, and then you could have maybe do it as a trilogy, and that would be quite satisfying, I think. And then maybe you could have spin-offs into TV series as well. But it's a great kind of pulp sci-fi adventure story, I'd say, with some humor in there too. Do you have one more?
Yeah, let me. I've got a few more, but
go on.
It's not worth going on about all of them. But let me mention one more.
Yeah.
Because this I don't know whether you've read this again, but it will at least be interesting to you, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a series of books by a name that I'm sure will be familiar to you, Stephen R. Donaldson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's not the Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever books.
Oh, okay.
So he wrote. So Stephen R. Donaldson, I think, is correct me if I'm wrong, is most well known for his Thomas Covenant books,
Yes.
which are essentially fantasy novels.
Yep.
He wrote another book series which I absolutely love called The Gap. Have you heard of these?
No, I don't think so.
So they're cool. It's called The Gap. So again, this is also sort of hard sci-fi. So spaceships, people flying around in spaceships, shooting each other with laser beams.
Mm-hmm.
It's a humanity out in space. They've conquered the stars. And the first book is called The Real Story, which is about a police officer called Morn Highland, who finds out that she suffers from something called gap sickness. And when spaceships travel between the farthest stars, they jump through something called the gap, which is why the series is called The Gap.
Yep.
But some people get something called gap sickness, that whenever they jump through the gap, for a short amount of time, they go into a trance and become psychotic.
Oh, wow.
So on her first mission, when she's on this mission with all of her family, so all her family are police officers, and they're on this sort of family ship, and they jump through the gap, and she suffers from gap sickness and then falls into this trance, and then this basically kills everybody in the family and scuttles the ship. And she gets rescued by the person that she was pursuing, who's this really vicious, evil person that essentially does awful things to her and tortures her. But then she gets rescued by this other ship, who are much more they're criminals, but they're more sort of criminals in the sort of Firefly sense of the word.
Right.
They're criminals, but they're like a family. And they're all together, just surviving from job to job, that sort of thing. And it's about them. I don't, like you said with the other stuff that we've talked about. I don't want to spoil it too much, or go into too many details.
Yeah.
But it's about this set of illegals and Morn Highland, who suffers from gap sickness, and how they strike out into the world and fight various governments and all sorts of things. But it's an absolutely fascinating. It's a really, really fascinating series. One of the best series I've ever read, I think. Yeah, just absolutely brilliant. Very, very readable.
Okay, and that's The Gap by Stephen R. Donaldson. No, I've not heard of it. I've heard of them, and didn't he also do some kind of King Arthur books as well? Stephen Donaldson, Lawhead and things like. No, that's Stephen Lawhead. Sorry, that's what I'm thinking of.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right.
Stephen R. Lawhead. Yeah, that's what I'm getting confused. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, there's a few there. Mostly science fiction ones, though. Do you want to list off some of the other ones that you had then? If you had a few more.
Sure. So all sci-fi, unfortunately. So actually, I've got two more that are listed. One is both of which are very much more lighthearted than all the other things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
But one of them was a series that I absolutely love from really probably a young teenager, which was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series.
Yeah.
Which is full on, straight sci-fi comedy. It's not even not trying to be a comedy. It's basically, essentially a sitcom in space. But that's such a brilliant, amazing universe. And Douglas Adams, before he died, wrote a series of books. By the time we got to the fourth book, it was being called a trilogy in 4 parts.
Yes.
but he wrote short stories and stuff beyond that. But yeah, it's a brilliant universe, really, really entertaining. And another series from somebody else who's now sadly dead, but I absolutely love these books as well, which was the Culture series from Ian M. Banks.
I thought you were going to mention that. I was surprised you hadn't so far, to be honest.
There's just such a brilliant universe, this sort of post-scarcity society where, people live for a really long time and most of the time just out there having fun. And it just such a brilliant, brilliant series of books. And there's one whole book that's just about essentially the autopilot on one of these ships. It's just absolutely fascinating set of books and ideas. So what about you?
So I was going to mention the culture novels because I've not read any of them, and the ones I've been told where to start was Look to Windward and Game. Is it something Master of Games or something?
Player of Game. My favourite one is Player of Games.
Okay, so I've got a copy of Look to Windward, and I was going to read that, and if I like that, I'll look at that one as well, the next one. But it's because there's so many, and people have said it doesn't read like a normal series of,
It's really not. So that's actually a good point. I think all of these things that we've been talking about have kind of been a series.
Yes.
In the sense that each installment follows on from the previous one.
Yes.
But the Culture series doesn't at all. They're unless I'm missing one.
No, I don't.
They're basically they're all completely independent stories, just all set in the same universe.
Yeah.
But they don't have the same characters, the same locations or anything like that. So you can basically pick one up completely out of sequence and just read them all in any order that you like.
Yeah, it's definitely so I was just knowing where to start, but those are the two I'm going to look at first and see. The only other one I was going to mention, we've already had, like Hitchhikers, we've had 2 films and a couple of TV series and audio things. So this is something that's already been done as a film and a TV series. But I think it's ripe for a proper remake, and it's ripe for them doing it well. And this is Alien Nation.
Oh yeah, I absolutely love that series.
So for those who haven't seen it, in 1988, if you're not old enough to remember, there was a film with Mandy Patinkin and James Caan, I think.
Yeah, and the main bad guy was played by Terence Stamp.
Yes. So the film and the TV series is based upon a very simple premise that aliens arrive, but they're not conquerors, they're not anything like we'd imagine. They're essentially refugees, and I think their own planet is knackered and it's gone or whatever it is, and there's several 100,000 of them. There's not millions, but there's a lot of them, and they basically come to Earth as refugees, integrate into the society, and become just another facet of Earth. Obviously it has some knock-on effects with the stuff that they bring, some technology, different physiology, belief systems, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just another diverse culture mixed in with the rest of the world. The film was quite good. TV series was pretty good because it was able to expand upon some of the stuff they touched on in the film. But I just think there's a lot more scope to do either a series of films or do a really interesting TV series and do 8 episodes and do 5 seasons or something. And that's it. And then maybe if they want to do more, do a spin-off or something, but something like that could work really, really well, I think, today.
Yeah, it was an absolutely brilliant series, and it was a really interesting tale because it's not, like you were saying, it's not a tale of alien invasion. It's essentially a tale of... So I can't remember what it's like in the movie, but in the TV series, the ship that crash lands is essentially a slave ship.
Yeah.
So almost everybody on the ship was slaves. But there's there was obviously the slave masters on board the ship as well that have just sort of slipped into society the same way as everybody else, but they're trying to hunt them down. And there's, hundreds of thousands of these aliens just trying to fit into American life. And it's absolutely fascinating. Brilliant, brilliant show. And, and it's a great film, but in the TV show, they sort of, it's a sort of a police procedural show.
Yeah.
But also they sort of delve into the family life of an alien family and how they interact with humans and things like that, and the main character. So one of the things that when these aliens arrived is that they obviously didn't have human names.
No.
So almost all of the aliens have, because they were being processed by essentially bored people, they've got really, so many of them have got really comical names. So the main alien character is called San Francisco.
Yes.
And he's got a couple of children that are sort of teenagers, and one of them starts to become very so San Francisco is trying to fit into human culture, but the son is sort of rebelling against that and becoming part of not like a terrorist organization, but sort of a resistance organization from the aliens.
Yeah.
But the daughter is going the opposite way, and she's getting crushes on human boys and things like that. And it's really clever how they sort of tell the story of these aliens and the alternate culture, both through the police procedural components, but also through the sort of home life and everything that's going on with them. It's a brilliant. So they did one season of it,
yes,
but then they did like 4 sort of TV movies.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, it's been a while since they've done anything though. It's been years.
I think it was. So I think it was like the early 90s it came out. I think.
Yeah, it's a perfect time. It's ripe to do something interesting with it. And technology now, things moved on, and it's a different way to do. Not exactly a police procedure. It doesn't have to be. That's the other thing. I mean, the film was, and the TV series was, because it allowed them to do different kinds of story and go into different places. But it doesn't have to be a police procedural. It could be a different kind of story set within this universe. Why not? Just the idea of it, the core premise of it is really interesting. And there's lots of scope to explore things within this universe. So that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, a brilliant choice. Yeah.
Okay, so are there any franchises out there that you'd like to see extended? Any universes that you'd like to see made into their own cinematic or TV universe? Get in touch and let us know. But that's it for the meantime. We'll be back next month. But in the meantime, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.